Monster RX93.1 presents Heard on Thursdays. Hot conversations on hot topics. Your host, Nikki Porter.
Pumupunta, akala mo, di natana ka. Yeah, dun ka pa, sa mawawala. Kaya di ko yan
people, which is a totally different skill set. And I think the problem is in a lot of companies, especially the smaller ones, like small to medium businesses, they don't really do intentional onboarding training for new managers.
Okay.
Usually what we recommend is if you have a person who's going to get promoted into like a supervisory managerial role, they need training to know what that means, what's expected from you in this new role. But I don't think a lot of companies do that, or at least intentionally have like a program or a set of activities even that people can do for it.
And again, it's such a good thing for businesses to be aware at least of those things, so that when they ask for your assistance for your workshops, it's really to improve these managers and leaders that they've promoted, so that it doesn't become a problem with the subordinates or like the employees who are under them, for sure. Now, what are some of the reasons companies would refer to you to improve their organizational culture then?
Right. So a lot of times I find, especially with like smaller companies, they don't actually go to you and say, we want something culture related.
Okay.
It's usually like the problems I mentioned earlier. Leaders don't know how to lead, or the teams are not bonding well, they don't work well together, they don't collaborate. So usually those are the problems that they would mention. And then all of that is related to culture. So the more I dig into it, the more you can see like, oh, okay, this might be like what's going on and why these are the behaviors that you see as part of your culture.
So how do you, so let's say now the situation is that the teams aren't really, they're not really blending well, or they're not working well together. So what are the questions that you would ask, or like activities, if you should have them, to figure out like what the root cause is? What's it like?
So in the beginning, usually you start with a lot of open-ended questions, right? I'm sure you know this. When you interview people, it's just tell me more, or ano po bang nangyari? Why are you coming to me asking for training? Like what sparked that interest? Because usually there are different scenarios or situations that they can talk to you about, and then you can start from there. And then also you ask, like, are the people new in the team? Is it a team where most of them are new to each other, or have they been working together for a long time now? Is the leader new? Is that like a factor that just came in? And then you also have to ask, what's the environment like? Maybe this team now they have a new job or a new task in the organization, or maybe they were in this department, now they got transferred to another department. So looking at the environment as well. And then looking at, like, if you say that there's something wrong with this team, what's the misalignment there that you're seeing, right? Like, usually when it comes to systems, you look at the alignments, and if someone thinks that something is a problem, then there's a sense there that something isn't lining up properly or the way you want it to. So then we start digging into, like, what are those misalignments that you're seeing? And that's where we recommend what interventions they can do.
Gotcha. So, I mean, and I like that there is it's almost like a surgical process. It's like a step-by-step process for you to try and figure out and dig deeper into what is going on, or what is the problem that they're stating or addressing to you the actual problem, or is there something else?
Deeper,
sometimes there's always something else that's much deeper too. Now, apart from, talking about like what workshops you do and how you do it also, we're going to be talking a little bit about like HR terms now that Gen Z millennials are sharing over on TikTok. On social media. So we're just going to break down on what some of these mean, how these look like also in work environments or in workplaces. So burnout, of course, that's something that's very well known. That term is very well known. But I want to know though, is there a time when burnout is a me problem, or when burnout is a company problem, or is it always a combination of both?
I think with everything, there's always a combination, right? Because what triggers your burnout, then that's something that's happening in the company, right? So you can't really say that it's just the person like there's something wrong with you if you're feeling that burnout. And then it's also not just the company's problem, because as individuals, we have mechanisms to be able to get the support that we need, ideally, right? In the ideal scenario. And so as an individual, there's a responsibility as well on your part to be able to maybe tell the company about it so they know what to do. But at the same time, if the company doesn't feel like it's a safe enough environment, then you wouldn't want to tell them about your burnout, right? So I think that's always like the two sides of the coin that you have to look at. And it's not just this person or this organization's fault. It's a combination of all of these things.
Right. And in addition to that, though, like I just wanted to add on to that. So, okay, usually it's not like it, most of the time it's not a singular, it's not just one person experiencing burnout at a company. And sometimes there can be other factors, or it can be like a domino effect. No, so it's like burnout is a problem, and then there's also high turnover, and then you'll probably have negative reviews on like JobStreet and Glassdoor and other places like that. So shouldn't there be an immediate response though to remedy something so systemic in like in the company? And like, but how come? And would you have an idea as to like maybe why there hasn't been any change, even if this is obvious?
Right. I mean, in the ideal world, in the ideal scenario, world, I'd love to say that yes, everything has to be an immediate response, but we also have to know that organizations are ships that are moving while you're building the ship, right?
Or like,
it's running towards like providing a value that customers or stakeholders want while they're trying to do things in that ship. And so it's harder to make changes when that's the scenario you have, right? I don't want to give excuses for organizations, but that's the reality that organizations face. So it's not like a snap where you can say, okay, I see people are burnt out, this is what we'll do. Like that usually goes through, okay, like what's happening here and what can we do about it? And I think it's smart if you think about it in that way, because then you can look at what are the long-term solutions that we can give. I think what companies are lacking though is looking at it like from a short-term, long-term perspective. Like, yes, you can say that you're developing mental health support programs, right? And that's good. But don't forget that right now, like you have people going through that. So in the short term, when your program isn't approved yet, what are you doing for the people who are needing that support? So I think it's that kind of long-term and short-term point of view that we still have to do better at in terms of organizations.
And that's why there are workshops available to help companies out. So at least like, maybe those reviews will probably improve over time, right? Because that would be the goal, to retain also the employees and the talent that you have. So there's also movement in the workplace now about setting work and life boundaries. I've seen so many different like role-playing videos like on TikTok, on Instagram, on how to like set workplace boundaries, work and life boundaries also. So what would you consider though? Because maybe there are some boundaries that can be, you could be maybe abusing that boundary in the parent for you to take advantage of, like, just to limit like your contact with the workplace, let's say. But what are examples of respectful boundaries to have in the workplace?
I think it's all about expectation setting, right? Like, as a manager, you have to be able to set those norms with your team to say, okay, like 5 p.m., everyone's done with work, that's it. And then there are certain scenarios that would clarify, certain scenarios that maybe would count as emergencies or urgent things that you can contact them beyond 5 p.m. So it's really expectation setting in the beginning of your relationship as a team where all of that will work. Because I think what's hard about boundaries is it's so personal, right? Like maybe for a manager, it's okay 8 p.m. But what if like you're a young person who wants to go out, have dinner by like 6, 7, 8 p.m., then that's not okay anymore. So it's really expectation and communicating those expectations, because there's no right answer to like what is a good boundary to set.
That's fair, yeah. And so then what can we do, or like, yeah, what can we do if a particular workplace environment or individuals in this workplace, like they hold your boundaries against you? Because I can only imagine like in a traditional workplace, when you start to set these new boundaries, they're going to be some might be offended. Like, why are you setting this boundary? Like, we're a team. We should be in this together. There's going to be that kind of mentality. So, like, what can we do to kind of assert that boundary?
No, I get that, because I think we talk a lot about boundaries now, work-life balance, integration, whatever. But a lot of the people who are like more senior in companies, they didn't grow up with that. So that's such a foreign idea to them. And they don't, they don't mean like bad when they call you out for maybe leaving exactly at 5 or something. It's just they weren't used to that, because for them, you wait for the boss. If it's 7 p.m. and the boss is still there, you stay, right? And that's just how they think about it. So no, I get where the struggle is, especially for people who are trying to change it. So in terms of what to do, it's really communicating that as early as possible. So talking to your manager, I usually recommend that new hires have at least like one-on-one meeting with your manager, if not your first day of work, like your first week of work. And don't just talk about your tasks or responsibilities. Really talk about like your style. What's your work style like? What are some tasks that you enjoy? Some tasks that you want more support in? What time you usually like working? Like when your brain is working at its optimal level or whatever. So really thinking about things like that and telling your manager about it. And then another thing is, when you're getting into a company, and if these things are super important for you, try to research beforehand and see, is this the kind of culture that would support what's important for me? If that's a non-negotiable for you and you find that it's different in that company from stories that you've heard or from research online, then maybe it's not the right fit. And you're better off choosing or applying somewhere else.
Yeah, and so that's why there are also job search engines that will help you in figuring that out and narrowing it down.
Search engines.
Very honest and like really unfiltered sometimes. Now, so like there's also this reputation, no, that the way like let's say like there's a company, there's so many, that there's a lot of problems, like under the surface it looks great, bottom line looks great, but to resolve these issues, what do they do? They will throw a pizza party. so what does that tell you? Okay, one, what does that tell you about an organization? And number two is, what is a good alternative? Maybe we can like incorporate a pizza party there, but how can we make it more functional for the betterment of for the culture?
Yeah, such a common problem, right? Like, I think people have good intent when they want these team bonding activities, whatever, pizza party, going out, dinner, drinking, right? You want the team to bond, but at the same time, if you don't look at the bigger system, or if you just throw that activity at them, then you're ignoring the other problems that could come up. So sometimes when I hear about companies that don't really address issues, but they all go out all the time, they require employees to go to the to the events, what that tells me is like, okay, they're not ready to actually do something to make change, because maybe they're scared of what more questions will unearth, like what other problems that are harder to solve might come up. So yeah, like pizza parties, activities, team bonding, I think those are okay, but without like better foundations
Yeah.
for the team, then it's just like an empty activity, right? You're just doing it for the sake of doing it.
Yeah. It's kind of like a band-aid sometimes, no? Parang if people are feeling down for morale, diba? To boost morale like short term though.
Yeah, and that's okay, right?
Yeah.
Like if everyone's feeling down on a Friday, let's go out Friday night. That's okay. But then come Monday, you have to ask people, hey, like what's going on? Or what got you feeling down? Like, how's your project? Anything I can help you with? How's your work with that other department? Then start digging into it and see like what are the more systemic problems that maybe you have to address.
Yeah, no, I love that because it's like usually there's no follow-up. It's just like, let's have a good time. That's it. And then we're back to work on Monday with no follow-through. So I think, that's one of the takeaways this evening, you guys. If you have another pizza party coming up, follow through with your employees.
Like it's a snap. It's not people expect that, okay, one activity done. I see this too. Like sometimes I get requests for doing a team building and then they think that after the team building, that's it. Like everyone's collaborating, but they didn't do anything to fix the system for documentation so people know who's working on what. Or maybe they didn't put a board up that says when are the stuff due so people will know when they have to work with who. So then you didn't really do anything to support that collaboration, right?
That's so important. So it's, and that's true. Like not only I'm thinking about it, like those team building activities that you do, it's like, it's fun for like a day or however long it lasts. But then, when we're back at the workplace, it's just, it feels the same. It's like there's no signifiant change that you would expect from, or that you would hope from a team building activity. So something to consider, I guess, for managers and supervisors. So now I'm also interested in wondering now, because like, okay, part of HR, like something that HR likes to do, especially for big companies, is that they hold evaluations. Like employees, like will fill up evaluation forms online or written. I want to know though, how confidential are these exactly? Because right, HR obviously their boss is whoever is like at the top of the company, and so if there's like a chief complaint about something, like, are they legally bound to not disclose who said what? Or is it like, or are they allowed to tell if the boss is like, sino nagsabi nito? Like, are they allowed to disclose that? So like, what's the deal? How honest should employees be, I guess, in evaluations? Because it can be scary.
Right. Yeah. Performance evaluations, that's one of the most important things that you can do in a company, right? And it's all rooted on feedback. So there are studies actually. There's this consulting firm in New York. It's called Neuro Leadership Institute, or NLI. And what's special about them is they're management consultants, but they also work with neuroscientists, neurologists, and they study how the brain works at work. So then what they found was, like humans, when we hear the word feedback, even that creates a threat response.
Wow. Okay.
Right? And it makes sense because usually feedback is negative. It's pointing out something wrong about you. That's why we're scared of it. And I think that's what makes evaluations or performance management really hard, because it's rooted in getting feedback and giving feedback. So that's the environment that we're working with, right? So then if employees do not trust the company, if they don't feel like it's safe to be honest here, they're not going to be honest. And while that might benefit the company in the short run, because you think, oh, everything's going so well, then you're not really seeing the real issues that are happening in your organization. So what you want is to create this kind of, so we call it psychological safety. It's a term coined by Amy Edmondson, and it's really about like having the kind of team where you believe that I can take risks. I can take interpersonal risks. So I can tell you that I've made a mistake, and I know like you won't laugh at me or call me so stupid naman, this girl. Or like I can tell you a new idea and you won't say, no, like that's so bad. So it's really having that kind of safe environment that helps people to know that they can be honest with their feedback and to also be receptive to the feedback that they may get. So what we want is to encourage companies to try to have that kind of psychologically safe space first, because you cannot just tell people, be honest in your feedback and it'll be private, don't worry about it, if they don't believe that it's a safe space for them to be honest.
And I think I love that you mentioned like the they always say be honest. You can just be honest, like but it's like it's not an automatic thing, especially when it's like you have an idea where these papers are gonna go, diba? So it's you don't know who's gonna read it. You don't know where it goes from after filling it up.
So transparency is key, I think, with these evaluations. You have to be able to explain to employees where they go, who's going to read it, what's going to happen to it. So for example, I should be able to tell you, Nikki, if you write down, let's say your feedback about your manager, we collate all of that, your manager will read it, we take out names, and then what happens is a coach comes in to talk to your manager, and your manager will come back to you next month, gather the team together, and talk about what they heard in their evaluations. So the more the employee knows what the process is, then the more likely they'll get more and more comfortable with being in that process.
And I think that's, and the way that you're telling me, it's, even if this is like a whole role play situation, let's say, it's like, it's very, like, if it's clear, if you understand like where the forms are going and what the process is, I think, there's some level of trust that is established in that. It's like, I'm a little more comfortable in expressing whatever it is that I want to express. But again, that transparency, that's like, not to say that that all companies don't have it, but in an ideal world, that's how evaluations should be conducted.
Clear is kind, right?
Exactly.
And, no, you're right, because it's an ideal scenario. Like in the real world, not all companies will have a robust performance management system.
Right.
Sometimes, for example, you do your self-evaluation and then you don't hear back, right? Like no one tells you if you're doing well or not. Like you're just floating around. So that's where HR, I think, has to do better. Like pushing for companies to know how important it is to have a proper performance management system.
And I think that lines up really well also with like the purpose that you have in building organizational cultures that are more empathic, inclusive, and also promotes like a sense of learning. So I do want to dive a little bit into empathy in the workplace. Again, this is one of those new buzzwords or terms that we are applying in the workplace, not just with like, interpersonal relations, but also in the workplace. So how important is it, number one, and how would that look like in a workplace?
Right. I mean, I think in terms of importance, think about what's happening in the world now, right? Like, we all talk about empathy and how much we need it, but then the more you have to apply it to what's going on in the world, the harder it gets. So just imagine that in your personal lives, and then now you have to apply it at work. So that's also very hard. But I think it's so important because at the end of the day, at work, you're dealing with human beings, and what's more complex than that? Like, a lot of people would say, professional tayo, iwan mo yung emotions, diba? Dapat business lang, walang personalan. Like, these are quotes that we always hear about, but that's not how the world works anymore. And I don't think that's how the world worked ever. We just thought it did before. So I think in the world of work now, there's a bigger recognition that we bring our whole selves. What happened to you in the morning with your kids, with your husband, with your wife, you bring that to work. And you need to have a kind of team that will understand that people are humans too with different problems. What that would look like. So with empathy, it's so hard because it's so abstract. And so the way I like to think about it is at two different levels. So on the higher level, from an organizational perspective, you need to have policies and the leaders who believe that, yes, we have to take care of people. That's our responsibility as employers. If they don't believe that, then the rules, policies, processes will not reflect it. So it has to come from that. And then on a more micro individual level, it's something you experience every day with your teammates and with your manager, with your leader. So in the example earlier, right? If something happened with you and your kids or your wife, your husband, your partner in the morning, if you are in a kind of team where you feel that empathy, you can say in a Monday morning meeting, like, team, I'm just not at 100% right now. I know that we have this meeting and I'm here. I will be listening. It's just that I'm not at 100%. So please bear with me. But later on, if there's anything you need to talk about with me, I'm there. So now we're at the same page, right? Like, I know what's going on with you and I can deal with that as well.
Yeah. As in, I feel like that would be interesting to have like a huddle in the morning. No, I feel like, and because before, or at least where I used to work, let's say, there's always like a breakfast huddle, and then but it's more to talk about like what we're supposed to accomplish in the day, not really to check in with ourselves. So I feel like it could make a difference, no, if like a breakfast huddle or just a huddle in general, or a briefing rather, would be about briefing one another and like where we're at, like psychologically. So just
it's just, it could be awkward at first. That's probably why not a lot of people start it or start doing it. And then also, it could take time, right? That's why you have to balance it out. Like, some days you really have like a long chat. Some days it's just energy level check, 1 to 5. Where you at, right?
That
I'm
works.
at a 4. Yeah,
for sure. So that's what empathy would look like, at least, in terms of checking in with one another in the workplace. Is there another value that you believe holds just about the same, like the same level of importance or more importance than empathy?
Okay. I think empathy could be a really good like foundation for all of that. But in terms of values, inclusion is something that I like talking about a lot.
Sure.
So inclusion is really creating those safe spaces, psychologically, physically, where people feel like, I can be like myself here. I can bring myself to work. I can thrive here because now people celebrate who I am with all of the diverse layers of my identity. So I think it goes a little bit beyond empathy in the sense that empathy could sometimes be so inward, like it's something I feel or I think. But with inclusion, it gives that added kind of nudge to like make that empathy more external, because now I have to relate with you and find ways to include you.
Yeah, and it creates some sort of like safe space in the workplace that, hey, I am accepted in this workplace. I can, let's say, at the very least, dye my hair in like the colors of the rainbow. I can flash my tattoos because like this is like you'll see it no matter how many times I fold or like hide through all the sleeves and everything. So I think safe spaces, I think that's another term, no, like that's popular going around in the workplace. So how else does that look to promote like inclusion, like safe spaces? What else is required to have that?
Such a meaty question. The thing about safe spaces is it's easy to say that this is a safe space.
Yes.
But it's your everyday actions that will tell a person if it's really safe for them to be who they are or not. So I think when it comes to creating those safe spaces, you need the everyday things, like everyday interaction with my teammates, with the leader. But if the environment is not set up for that, then a person will still be upset. So then you have to have policies that will support inclusion. So for example, even if we don't have same-sex marriage, right? Like, what are you doing for people who have partners of the same sex? Like, are you helping them out as well with benefits or whatnot? So these are the kinds of like big level policies that will really show people, okay, like you're willing to put the money where your mouth is at. Because at the end of the day, these things take money and budget, right? So where the money goes is what's important for you. So you have to show that as well.
Right. And so it's really like a matter of, so it's an everyday thing. Like, it has to be consistent also in your intention to build a safe space. And I think that's something that everyone in the workplace has to take part in. Because, right, I guess it's not just like, it's not just the manager. Of course, it would be nice to have the manager to be, to feel safe to talk to and just express yourself. But, to have, your colleagues also respect you in that level, I think would boost even like your productivity, your wanting to be there.
Yeah. I think over the past few years, we have recognized that managers are so important.
Yeah.
We always say people leave managers, not companies, right? So there's that. But at the same time, it's not just your manager that you talk to. Like, in some levels, I think with a country like the Philippines, that's so very collective, you are with your teammates a lot. So if you don't feel that belongingness with them, it'll be very hard to work.
Yeah, absolutely. And so something that, I think I guess like, companies should try and foster now. Because yes, like, we're being more open, being more expressive also with our individualities. And so I think it would be really important to try and promote that in the workplace. Although I feel like, it's not something that can be done overnight, obviously.
Yeah,
so it'll take some time.
How I wish, right? Yeah.
Oh my goodness. But so inclusion, empathy, and learning also. Now let's go back a little bit into like some of the terms from social media, no?
Oh, okay.
So there's this term now that's called quiet quitting. I've seen like the definition of it and some examples of it. So from an HR expert, let's ask Elizha. So explain to us what quiet quitting is, and what do you think what do you think are the causes of this trend to happen?
I've seen people talk about the quiet quitting in two different ways, I think. So there are some people who say quiet quitting is you're doing like the bare minimum, or you're just like coursing along through work, not really doing like your best. You're just doing what needs to be done.
Yeah.
And some people say like that's a bad thing, but some people say no, like that's what work is, right? You just do what's expected of you, and that's it. So then there are two different ways that people see it and define it, I think.
And so but then, okay, I'm curious though. So it's like the bare minimum, which is doing what is expected of you. Isn't that literally like the job though, right? So it's like, it's kind of an interesting perspective also, because it's like you're quiet. Because I guess, yes, a lot of us, we will do things that are beyond the job description, beyond like what we saw on like the posting, let's say. So for quiet quitting, you're saying like it's, well, at least for one school of thought, it's just to do exactly what was expected in that posting.
What's asked of me, and that's it, right? So I don't go one side or the other. I think for me, like, yes, on one level, do what's expected of you at the minimum, and that should be okay, because that's what you signed up for. That's what they're paying you for. And then at the same time, I also think you can't quiet quit for a long time. Let me explain that. Because if you're just telling yourself to not become like the best that your potential can do, maybe there's a different job or role out there where you really feel like, I have energy to do this and I'm excited to do this.
Gotcha.
I see how, like, in the short term, maybe for a few years, if you just need the financial stability, it'll work to just, okay, I'll do what's expected of me. That's it.
Yeah.
But then after a few years, I will encourage a person who's doing that to really think what's something that you're excited about, something that you feel like, okay, I want to do this and try my best to give it my all. Because maybe you're quiet quitting because that's not the right fit for you.
Yeah. Okay. And okay. So and this next question might be a little bit of like a, what do you call this? Not really a sensitive topic, but then there might be different arguments because, for example, you get your job position, you have the job description, you have how much they're paying you for this position, but they make you do things that are beyond that. So, like, when is it appropriate for you to do things that are beyond your, not necessarily above your pay grade, but like that are just like not mentioned in your job description, maybe aligned with what you do, but then it's like, that's not something what I signed up for. So when is it appropriate to do that or apply yourself?
I think before anything else, you have to know, what are my non-negotiables? What are the things that for me, I will really not do it if it's not aligned with what's important for me, my current life, my situation, etc. So the more clear we are about those non-negotiables, then the more we can know, like, okay, this is going beyond what I can do or what I want to do. And then, of course, like, the second question is, how important for you is this job? Like, is this something that in your reality, in your financial situation, do you really need it? Or do you see this being a key stepping stone towards that future that you want to be working on? So then you have to clarify that for yourself as well, to know how willing you are to go beyond what's asked of you. And then I think the third thing is, there's a part of this where you have to tell them what you think is part of the job and not part of the job, so you can be clear about that as well. Again, going back to expectation setting, right?
Yeah.
Maybe for the people giving you those extra, quote unquote, extra tasks, maybe they don't think it's extra, but for you, you think it's extra. So then really having like the same page on what is the job, like what is required of me, what's something I can do or should do extra. Like, these are conversations that you should be having recurringly, consistently. So you're both like on the same page on what is going on with your working relationship.
And I think that is something as Filipinos we have trouble expressing in the workplace, diba? To try, for one thing, boundaries, diba? In the workplace, hard to already try and address that because we didn't grow up with that idea that we
say
can.
Yes, right?
Yeah. So, and then another, like, actually having to sort of negotiate or have a discussion with regard to your, job responsibility. That's another thing. That's something that it's an uphill climb. It's going to be a challenge, but I think it's also necessary. But it's easier said than done. As much as I am saying it right now, encouraging.
Exactly.
It's all hard.
Especially if you're a newer hire or a younger professional, these are things they don't teach you in school. Right. So you don't know what to do. But what I appreciate is, a mentor told me before that it's actually a sign of professional maturity if you're able to have these conversations and topics, and you can complain and say it in a way that justifies what you're complaining about. So I think it's that skill that will really show that, okay, like, this person has that professional maturity to handle themselves at work. Of course, that doesn't mean that all the work should be just on that person and not the system. But a part of it is we also have to learn how to speak up for ourselves in these scenarios.
Would you have like a workshop that's about like how employees can set boundaries? Because I feel like that would be so helpful, especially with the culture that we have, diba? Because we always say yes, like, kayanin ko to, susuka, hindi susuko, diba? Yung mga ganon. So I feel like it would be so useful to have that. Yes, we can take up space and say that, okay, I feel like I don't have the bandwidth to deal with this. or like I feel like maybe I would need help in executing this particular task. So we talked about quiet firing, and you mentioned that there is quiet quitting.
Yeah.
And you said that there's the opposite, loud quitting. Please explain what that is.
I saw it in an article that was compiling all of the terms, like what you're doing. And then, so quiet quitting is you're doing the bare minimum, but you're kind of like, you want to be invisible in a way, right? Yeah. Like you're not bringing so much attention to the fact that you're doing the minimum. Loud quitting is you want people to see that I'm upset. Like I'm just doing the minimum because I am disappointed by someone.
Oh my gosh. That's so funny. And so it's kind of like, but I feel like that would be, well, I mean, both versions are kind of like not a very mature way of dealing the, how upset you are with regards to an organization. But one is obviously louder than the other, but it will get the attention, I guess.
Yeah, in some ways, I do think that when you're loud quitting, at least if your manager cares, they'll know what to do to address it, or they can talk to you about it. Quiet quitting is... See, the hard thing about it is there's a level where we all know that it should be okay that you just do what's expected of you. But there's also another level where we tell managers, you have to develop people and help them feel like they can grow their potential here. Right. So now it's so hard to balance those two truths.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So it's a mixed bag for sure to try. But I guess if you had to choose, I feel like there are more people quiet quitting than loud quitting.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, okay, so I briefly mentioned this, quiet firing naman. So, are you familiar with this term, and like how does that manifest in the workplace?
So the definition I know is quiet firing is you want someone gone because maybe they're not performing or maybe they have behavioral issues, problems that's hurting everyone else in the workplace, but you don't do the actual steps to fire them. Okay. You're kind of just isolating them, maybe giving them bad tasks or unwanted tasks until they quit and exclude themselves.
So it's waiting for them to resign.
Yeah.
Or encouraging them silently to resign.
Quietly firing them without telling them that you're out.
Oh, wow. So it's like the liability isn't on the company also. Is it possible? Is that a way of like looking at it too?
I think it's not a good thing though, because at the end of the day, like as a manager or a leader, a skill that you should have is being able to talk to a person about these kinds of difficult conversations. And the more you let that person there, like let's say, for example, if they really are underperforming, maybe they're better in another team. Or how is that underperformance also influencing and affecting other people in the team? Your inaction as a manager will be a message to the other people in the team that it's okay to underperform because they'll just keep you here.
Right. My gosh. And so like, and I can just like imagine this in a bigger and a broader perspective also. It's like for many kasi like they think that organizational culture, it's like a by the way. It's like you read through it, you go through the website, it's like our values, core values, mission, vision, blah, blah, blah. But in the grand scheme of things, a supportive and empowering workplace culture can positively impact society. So I wanna expound on that more. Like, can you explain how that can reflect or how that can impact having a supportive, empowering workplace culture? It can positively impact society.
Right. I read somewhere that if you think about an average person, that person spends about a third of their life at work. That's a long time to be in an organization, to be with teammates. And so if you imagine that in that third of your life, the behaviors of empathy, inclusion, valuing diversity, if those are the behaviors that you cultivate, then it's more likely that you also learn those behaviors and hopefully apply them in other communities or other organizations in the broader society that you're in. I think what's so special about organizations is we can actually compensate behavior that you want. So, right, if you're in a societal level, we can say that we should all be honest. But other than you go to jail if you steal, and some people don't even go to jail, right? Like, other than you go to jail if you steal, there's really not a lot of reinforcements or punishments that we can do. In organizations, you can tie these things with pay. So for example, there are actually companies where you have diversity and inclusion KPIs or performance indicators built into a leader's bonus. So they have to hit certain targets or show certain behaviors before they can get the bonus that they want or that they're looking for. And so in organizations, you can compensate people to show the behavior that you want. You can fire people who are not behaving in alignment with those values. You can promote the ones with the values you want to see. So that's the kind of special environment that you have where you can really help people to practice these kinds of behaviors that would also help in the broader society.
I love that. And I think because and again, this is like a third of our lives in organizations. So it's like at least make it like a positive environment, positive like that has positive reinforcement on these like good values like to practice in society too. I think that's what a lot of us don't understand or don't see, and I think needs to be I think it just needs to be for them to be more aware of it. And that's why we have the show. And that's why we have Elizha here too. To help us heard on Thursdays. There we go. Now we're nearing the end of the show. And I just want to, I don't know if you've heard of this particular term, but I talked about it earlier this afternoon on my show, Good Vibes. And it's called FOBO. So yeah, so FOBO, it's like, it's not like FOMO, pero it just has a different letter. So FOMO is like fear of becoming obsolete. So basically, this is in response to the looming dread of AI and robotics replacing the human workforce. Now, as an HR consultant, are you tracking this also, knowing how like, you know, it can, that like, you know, one day we can just be replaced, the human workforce can just be replaced by AI, by robotics. Have you thought about like how to tackle this with, you know, the workforce that we have now? Because of course, a lot of people are going to be out of jobs. Like, where do you come in also with regard to this evolving issue?
Right. Yeah. So I think for me, we cannot say stop the technology right now, right? Like, we have to be realistic first. That's the complex reality we're dealing with, and we can't put it all back in the bag, if you will. So now what, right? A lot of companies are encouraging people to upskill. So for example, you can do partnerships with different schools. So you can help them build the skills that the companies will need eventually. So that's super important. But then, you know, other than all of that, because there are so many studies already on what people can do and what organizations can do to cope. I think beyond the reskilling or upskilling or whatever it is, it's the human values that you have to develop. It sounds so cheesy, and I right? It sounds like it's all like, oh, love and heart, but no. But I think it's the value of like listening and dealing with complexity, communicating even about hard situations or hard topics. Like, these are the kinds of skills that you will need whether we have AI doing a part of your job or not, right? And so in the future, when computers can do a lot of the stuff that we do, we have to be able to bring in these factors, these, I don't want to say soft skills. These days we actually say like power skills or essential skills.
Okay.
So you want to bring in those essential skills that will help at least still create the kind of value that people want, the kind of environment that employees will want to work in.
Yeah, and I feel like it's also, I mean, the term that I can only think of is like, that human touch, right? Because it's like, granted that AI is forever learning, it's just, I feel like it still is different if you are communicating with one human to another in situations that would require that human touch too. Sure, there can be some, there can be some tasks that can be, technical stuff that can be performed by AI or robotics or anything like that. But I feel like, yes, we still need to, we need to boost our humanness so that we don't render ourselves obsolete with the fear of becoming obsolete.
Right now, one of the essential skills that a lot of companies are looking for in new hires is learning agility. So let's say, for example, the things you learn in college right now, maybe in 5 years, they have new technology and you don't need what you're learning in college.
Yeah.
But if you know how to learn and you have those skills to be able to cope with the new environment, then that's what companies will want.
There we go. Learning agility. So let's try and read up on how we can be ahead in some way with regard to AI and all that stuff. But thank you so much, Elizha, for joining me this evening, talking to us about human resources, organizational culture, how to be more empathic, inclusive in the workplace, and how to beat AI. I'm just kidding. No. So thank you very much. And to all the monsters who have kept it locked since this evening as well. This has been Heard on Thursdays with me, Nikki Porter. Catch me again next Thursday for another episode and keep it locked only here on The Monster. Bye-bye.
Monster exclusive interview. Monster exclusive interview. Only from Manila's hottest. Monster RX93.1.